Christopher Lee. Join me for 100 years of horror.
They may be hovering over you, or you.
An esoteric historical question. Who played Count Dracula on screen more often? BELA Lugosi, John Carradine, or yours truly? The answer, surprisingly, appears to be me. Yet if you ask someone to imitate Dracula, they don't do vocal impressions of John Carradine or me, thank heaven. No. 40 years after his death, BELA Lugosi's face and voice are inexorably linked to his most famous role. After Dracula, he seldom got the chance to show his versatility, his range, or his sense of humor.
Never dreaming I care, loving somebody somewhere, giving me my darling love. Ready?
You have booked your last food.
The biggest misconception about my father really is in the focus of everyone's knowledge and attention about him in the later years of his life, which were obviously not the best years of his life. And so that's what most people know about my father. They don't know about his glorious early years and middle years where he was so successful with roles such as Dracula, and how he traveled the world and how well he lived.
You see, in the National Theatre of Hungary in Budapest, all the great character parts are played by 4 or 5 different players. Each competes with the other. Each plays the part in accordance to their own conception.
Lugosi was known as the ladies' man, and he was probably the most sexually attractive male I have ever known in my life. He could walk into a room and there was this pull from every corner, and women just flocked to him. And I thought that was sort of funny, although I could feel it.
I am Dracula.
He toured with the play for nearly 2 years, but Universal Pictures wanted Lon Chaney, who had played a demonic vampire in London After Midnight. Chaney's death in 1930 opened the field to others.
Lugosi had made his test for Dracula before he put together a company to do the stage version of Dracula. And I was Lucy to his Dracula in that company, and we got as far as the Lovero Theater in Santa Barbara when he was called back being told that he had the part.
Dracula? Oh, what's he done to you, dear? Tell me.
He came to me. He opened the vein in his arm, and he made me drink.
The Spanish version of Dracula that was shot at exactly the same time, and with essentially the same script, it turns into parody. So one sees by comparing those two films how much Lugosi really brought to the role.
The follow-up film was to star Lugosi under the direction of Robert Florey, but Universal decided to cast Lugosi not as Frankenstein, but as the monster, then conceived as a vicious, unthinking brute.
My father told me that he actually turned down the role of Frankenstein, after which it was offered to Boris Karloff. And what he told me is the reason that he turned that down was because it had no lines, and he felt that grunting and doing the various gestures that Frankenstein did was really misuse of his talent. He also said he was very sorry he did that as a career move because it created one of his best competitors.
Murders in the Rue Morgue became the consolation prize to Lugosi and director Robert Florey. It provided both an opportunity for atmospheric expression.
Dr. Miracle in the Rue Morgue is guilty of 4 murders so far this week, and by now perhaps a 5th.
In 1932, BELA starred in the independently produced thriller White Zombie. And even though it was not a Universal production, the film's producers rented leftover sets from Dracula.
Zombie! Allez vite! Allez!
What are you studying now?
I'm studying now American slang. I know how to say okay, and cat's whiskers, and baloney, and how.
It is quite clear that Lugosi had a command of the English language, yet he never lost his distinctive Hungarian accent. The longest lasting of his 5 marriages began in 1934. Lillian Lugosi was more than 20 years Bela's junior. His domestic attitudes were apparently very European, very 19th century.
Ready for the test, Dracula? I'm ready, Frankenstein. Then let us begin. You understand, Bela, don't you? That the one who wins this little game of chess is to lead the parade at the film stars' frolic. Okay, buddies. You move, right.
Universal teamed Karloff and Lugosi together and thinking it would be good box office. And the first picture they did together was The Black Cat. And they were pretty equally billed, shared the same amount of screen time. They went on to do The Raven after that. And clearly Lugosi is the star of the show. Karloff's in just a few scenes. But yet Karloff received top billing. And finally, they teamed together for The Invisible Ray. After The Invisible Ray, Lugosi never had a starring role at Universal.
You're poisoned. Poisoned? And everyone I touch is poisoned. They die. If your men fail to capture him at the gate, and at midnight we bolt all doors and darken the entire house, face and hands will appear like phosphorus.
And if he touches anyone,
They die.
Competition between Karloff and BELA Lugosi, not that they were aware of it, that they masterminded or deliberately contrived, but the two men were I guess, symbols of that kind of horror picture at that time.
Well, it was Christmas time, and in those days they decorated not with Olympic banners, but with stills of the various stars blown up and a circle of Christmas lights around them and tinsel. And it was just when there had been the big smash hit of Frankenstein down the street. Came to the Karloff one, and he stopped and he bristled and muttered some things in Hungarian and hissed a bit. And we said, but after all, you know, Karloff could never play Dracula. But I think since he had tested for the monster, I think he felt sad that he didn't have it. It's again one of these strange situations where he was so good. I wish he could have had the chance to do some of these other parts.
Great Britain banned horror films altogether in 1937. Hollywood ceased production of this type of entertainment. Lugosi was unemployable for nearly 2 years.
I believe when I was born in 1938, those were tough financial times for my father. He hadn't worked for a while steadily. I heard that those were tough times for him. But what I remember from my early childhood is that he always provided a good life for me and my mother and himself.
Universal hired Lugosi for a paltry $500 a week. Far less than co-stars Basil Rathbone and Boris Karloff. Director Roland V. Lee was so incensed that he extended Igor's importance to the story and thus Lugosi's salary. The film was released in 1939, which proved to be a good year for Lugosi, and returned to England for one of his grimmest films, The Human Monster, also called The Dark Eyes of London, from a story by April Wallace. This was the first horror film that I ever saw. I was, 16, 17, something like that, barely old enough to see this kind of picture legally in Britain. Lugosi takes psychotic delight in eliminating his enemies.
Have been writing on little bits of paper. The police have been here. They might come back, Lou. They might ask you questions. You're blind and you can't speak. But you can hear. And that will never do.
What are you waiting for? Do as I told you. You kill Lou!
One of Lugosi's most memorable performances came in 1940. To generate interest in Lugosi's performance, he was hypnotized on the set of the film by a family friend, Dr. Manley P. Hall.
Let me out, please! I'm suffocating!
The film's director, Arthur Lubin, said he had never heard a man die so horribly and convincingly on screen as Lugosi. Even though Lugosi later claimed he was never hypnotized for the scene, experts say he was.
The whole hypnosis thing in Black Friday was actually cooked up as a publicity angle because Lugosi just had a very small role in the film. This was around the time where it looked like Universal was really going to get back behind Lugosi and put him back on top again. And what happened was they opted for Lon Chaney Jr. instead, and it was the whole Karloff thing all over again.
The Wolf Man, originally conceived in 1939 as a gypsy werewolf tale, was supposed to be Lugosi's reward for his fine work in Son of Frankenstein. The role instead went to Lon Chaney Jr. On the other hand, smaller studios such as Monogram and Columbia still considered him worthy of star roles.
We didn't socialize at all. I didn't really know him. I admired him, and he was a very courteous man, a very calm man, and a very genial man. That he pulled on his red wine all day long, but it never showed, never missed a line.
Given a halfway decent script, Lugosi could bring sympathy and understanding even to the part of a serial killer.
What I remember about the first time I saw my father in a scary movie was when the children who were my age, and this was, in the around age 5 or 6, I remember we all went to a movie and all the other little kids were hiding behind the seats because it was a scary movie. Of course, to me, it was just my father. And it didn't frighten me at all, and I wondered what was wrong with these children. And I've never forgotten that event.
You and I should work together. You mean we would sell the bodies to the doctors together? Dig them up? There'll be no digging. The kirkyards are too well guarded. We will, so to speak, burn them.
That was designed originally just for Karloff. And then the studio got an idea it would be marvelous if we would say Karloff and Lugosi.
Well, my take on that is the same as BELA Jr.'s, and that is that neither one of us ever heard our father say a disparaging word about the other. I think I do remember my father saying on one occasion that it was a shame that BELA hadn't mastered the English language a little more completely, because it would have allowed him to use his extraordinary acting skills in a lot wider range of vehicles.
Go back in there! Go back in there! Run!
You see, I'm 30 years here in America, and 8 months ago I was called to come to England to revive the American version of Dracula. Doesn't Dracula ever end for you? No. Dracula never ends.
In 1955, Lugosi admitted himself to a state-run hospital to cure his addiction to painkillers.
Now, for those who are on it, I would really suggest they shall go right away and report their volunteer to the state hospital and get cured. Whatever state they're in? Yes, whatever state they're in. Or to go to a federal hospital. And for those who are just in danger, I would say they should be very careful, should pray, and shouldn't start it, because it's a terrible ordeal to go through a withdrawal. It's the greatest pain in the world.
What happened to my father was he became medically addicted to morphine because of the leg pains that he had resulting from an injury. And at a very late age in life, he turned himself in to be cured and came out of the hospital completely cured. And I think it was a very heroic effort to do that because he took a lot of heat from it. And I'm very proud of how he was able to take control of his life and lick a problem that he had.
You have no will of your own. When you awake, you will not remember what I now say. You hear me?
Yes, Master.
From now on, you will carry out any suggestion that reaches you from my brain. Instantly, without question. When I will you to do a thing, it shall be done.
Shortly after his rehabilitation, Lugosi's manager, agent Ed Wood, hooked him up with a local Hollywood TV station to be the host of Shock Theater. Shock Theater was a package of all the old Universal films that Lugosi had been in. And it was going to be great for him because there was not a thing Universal could do about it, and he would be the host of the show and the star of the show. And horror films were big. Again, monsters were huge, and Karloff was in big demand again. And if the deal had gone through, it was apparent Lugosi would have been on top again. Unfortunately, he died a week after the contracts were signed. It's ironic that the Shock Theater deal would have been probably the only project that Lugosi and Ed Wood did together that actually made some sense.
Yes, I saw Ed Wood. I really didn't find myself very much drawn to wanting to see it, except what I'd heard about Martin Landau doing Lugosi, and I thought he was marvelous in it. I went to see it just primarily because I don't like to vote on the Academy Awards unless I've seen the work. I'd seen all the other actors up, the supporting actors up, except that. So I went to see it, and I thought Landau was marvelous in it. I thought he really caught Lugosi so well.
Lugosi, in fact, was buried in full vampire costume. Universal Pictures may have prevented BELA from playing Dracula in life, but they couldn't stop him from playing Dracula in death. His dream was that audiences around the world would respond to a Technicolor remake of Dracula. Producers scoffed. This was 1956, an age of giant insects and aliens from space. He died with this dream unrealized.
So you try to pay me in flattery, telling me that I'm a dreamer.
Well, I do dream. Dreams that you could never guess.
2 years later, I starred in a Technicolor remake of Dracula. Audiences around the world responded. Some years after that, I was given this signet ring, a duplicate of the ring worn by Lugosi when he played Dracula. I wore it in all subsequent films in which I played the character out of respect for Bram Stoker, for fans around the world, and of course, my predecessor.
There's nothing quite like the strange goings-on at Collingwood. The Dark Shadows double bill is next on Sci-Fi.